Not all RPGs are built around power fantasy, heroic arcs, or comfortable progression curves. These are built around loss, uncertainty, and systems that quietly remind you that survival isn't guaranteed. And once you understand how they work, it becomes clear why most players bounce off them long before they see what they're actually doing. Drova presents itself as a top-down action RPG, but its structure is closer to a systemic survival RPG than a traditional power fantasy. Combat is fast, but recovery is slow, and resources are deliberately scarce. You're encouraged to plan routes, avoid unnecessary encounters, and treat healing as a strategic resource rather than a safety net. Progress comes from learning terrain, enemy patterns, and faction dynamics rather than simply leveling up. The world is governed by competing groups with shifting allegiances, and your actions quietly reshape how areas behave. NPC reactions, available quests, and even regional hostility can change based on your decisions. The game rarely announces these changes clearly, forcing you to interpret cause and effect through observation rather than UI prompts. Progression feels grounded and restrained. Skills grow slowly. Equipment upgrades are meaningful but rare, and poor choices can stall your momentum for long stretches. The game discourages grinding, instead rewarding route planning, information gathering, and restraint. Reception has been quietly positive. Critics praised its world design, mechanical cohesion, and grounded pacing, while some players struggled with its opacity and minimal guidance. Drova doesn't make you feel unstoppable. It makes you careful, and for players who enjoy learning a world through friction, that becomes its greatest strength. Darkwood presents itself as a survival horror game, but behaves more like a hostile role-playing system disguised as one. There is no mini-map, no hand-holding, and very little sense of long-term security. Progress is slow, knowledge is partial, and nearly every mechanic is designed to make you feel uncertain about what you actually control. Exploration is less about discovery and more about negotiation, with space, with visibility, and with your own tolerance for risk. The day-night cycle defines the entire experience. Daytime invites cautious movement and scavenging, while nighttime turns your own shelter into a pressure chamber. You're not preparing to become stronger. You're preparing to survive another night without bleeding out your limited resources. The game teaches you early that preparation is often more important than execution, and that hesitation can be as dangerous as recklessness. What makes it especially effective as an RPG is how it treats progression. You don't grow into dominance. You grow into familiarity. The world doesn't become safer. You simply become better at reading its threats. Choices are rarely framed as moral, but as practical compromises, trading comfort for safety, speed for silence, curiosity for survival. Systems are layered in a way that rewards understanding rather than aggression, and failure is presented as part of the learning loop rather than a setback. Its reception reflects that friction. It was praised for its atmosphere and mechanical cohesion, while many players struggled with its opacity, punishing pacing and limited guidance. Darkwood doesn't accommodate confusion. It waits for comprehension. For players who adjust, it becomes quietly consuming. For those who don't, it remains impenetrable. The Sinking City frames itself as a detective-style, open-world RPG, but its underlying structure is far less about empowerment and far more about uncertainty. Investigation is treated as an active mechanical system rather than a narrative wrapper. You're rarely given direct answers, only fragments that must be assembled through exploration, reading, and interpretation. The game often allows multiple conclusions, and it does not confirm whether your deductions are correct. Combat exists, but it is intentionally stiff, slow, and resource-heavy. Ammunition and healing supplies are scarce, and encounters are structured to feel costly rather than cathartic. You're encouraged to avoid fights not because they are impossible, but because they are inefficient. Survival is framed as conservation, not domination. The city itself behaves like a hostile system, Districts change over time, sanity effects distort perception, and environmental storytelling replaces traditional quest markers. Navigation becomes an active interpretation rather than direction following. Even movement through familiar spaces can feel uncertain once the world begins to decay. Its reception reflects that slow, investigative design. Critics praised its atmosphere, commitment to player-driven deduction, and Lovecraft tone while noting technical instability, awkward combat, and uneven pacing. The Sinking City isn't interested in making you feel clever. It's interested in making you feel unsure, and that discomfort is the core of its identity. Vampire frames itself as a story-driven action RPG, but its most powerful systems operate beneath the surface, quietly shaping how you experience its world. You play as a doctor navigating a city plagued by disease and fear, and the game constantly asks you to balance survival against morality. Combat is real-time, but it is deliberately weighted and methodical, forcing you to consider stamina, spacing, and preparation rather than aggression. It is defined by its feeding system. You are rewarded mechanically for killing key NPCs, yet punished narratively and structurally for doing so. Entire districts can deteriorate based on your choices, reshaping enemy density, available quests, and even the emotional tone of the environment. You're never simply choosing power, you're choosing what kind of world you're willing to live in. This creates a tension that persists throughout the campaign rather than resolving early. Progression is tied directly to consequence. You can become stronger quickly, but doing so makes the city darker, deadlier, and less stable. Refusing that power preserves humanity, but slows your growth and makes combat harsher. The game never tells you which path is correct. It simply reflects your decisions back at you. Reception has always been divided. Critics praised its atmosphere, world building, and systemic ambition while pointing out uneven combat balance and technical limitations. Vampire isn't mechanically perfect, but few RPGs tie morality, progression, and world state together as tightly or as uncomfortably. Salt and Sanctuary looks like a stylized action platformer, but it is fundamentally structured like a bleak, unforgiving role-playing system. Beneath its hand-drawn art style sits a dense web of stat scaling, build planning, and progression commitment that punishes impulsive choices. Class selection, skill investment, and weapon specialization shape the entire campaign, and poor decisions echo far longer than most players expect. The game's world is intentionally hostile and disorienting. Zones loop, shortcuts reveal themselves slowly, and enemies are positioned to exploit impatience rather than raw difficulty. Combat favors timing, spacing, and resource management over spectacle, and healing is deliberately limited. You're not encouraged to feel powerful. You're encouraged to feel cautious. Every encounter has the potential to drain momentum, and recovery is never immediate. Where this game becomes distinctly dark as an RPG is in its treatment of narrative and progression. Story elements are fragmented, environmental, and often delivered without emotional framing. You're rarely told what your actions mean, only what they cost. Advancement feels earned through attrition rather than triumph, and even major victories carry a sense of erosion rather than celebration. Its reputation mirrors that tone. Reviews praised its mechanical depth and oppressive atmosphere, while some players criticized its ambiguity, balance quirks, and storytelling. Salt and Sanctuary isn't interested in accessibility. It's interested in persistence. And for players willing to engage with its systems on their terms, it becomes quietly absorbing rather than merely difficult. Skald presents itself with retro visuals and classic RPG framing, but beneath that familiar surface is a game built almost entirely around dread, uncertainty, and slow erosion. It does not push you toward heroism. It pushes you toward survival through planning, restraint, and compromise. Combat is turn-based and brutally practical, where positioning, preparation, and limited resources matter more than flashy abilities. Encounters are often less about winning cleanly and more about minimizing damage, so you can continue moving forward. What separates it from traditional old-school RPGs is its tone. The world is deliberately hostile, both narratively and mechanically. Storylines lean heavily into cosmic horror, cult influence, and the idea that knowledge itself is dangerous. Information is incomplete, motives are unclear, and trust is rarely rewarded. The game resists clean narrative closure, allowing unease to linger rather than resolving it. You're not uncovering mysteries to feel empowered. You're uncovering them to understand what kind of danger you're actually dealing with. Progression reinforces this bleak philosophy. Character growth is slow, equipment is scarce, and every stat investment feels permanent. The game discourages experimentation by making recovery difficult and by tying advancement closely to survival efficiency. You learn not to chase damage numbers, but to manage endurance, morale, and long-term sustainability. Scald's reception reflects its niche design. Critics praised its atmosphere, writing, and uncompromising tone, while some players found its pacing, opacity, and limited guidance exhausting. It doesn't ease players into comfort. It conditions them into caution, and for the right audience, that becomes its defining appeal. Pathologic 2 is not structured like a traditional RPG. It behaves more like a survival simulation wrapped in narrative systems that constantly pressure your time, morality, and physical well-being. You're not managing a character so much as managing a collapsing situation. Hunger, exhaustion, infection risk, reputation, and time itself all function as resources, and losing control of any one of them can quietly derail your entire run. The world is governed by schedules rather than scripted events. NPCs move, districts deteriorate, and opportunities disappear whether you're ready or not. Quests are rarely cleanly solvable, and success often means choosing which loss you're willing to accept. Helping one group can destabilize another. Ignoring problems can cause them to grow worse. The game rarely frames decisions as moral victories. Progression never truly liberates you. Even as your knowledge improves, your capacity remains fragile. Supplies stay scarce, and the clock never stops advancing. Learning how to prioritize becomes more important than learning how to fight. Combat exists, but it's intentionally awkward, discouraging reliance on violence as a primary solution. Reception reflects its uncompromising design. Critics praised its narrative ambition, systemic depth, and emotional weight, while many players struggled with the stress and punishing structure. Pathologic 2 does not want you to feel powerful. It wants you to feel responsible, and that makes it one of the most unsettling RPGs ever made. Fear in Hunger is not structured like a conventional RPG. It behaves more like a hostile simulation that happens to use RPG systems. Combat is turn-based, but it's built around dismemberment, permanent status effects, and irreversible loss rather than clean victories. Limbs can be severed, party members can be lost permanently, and survival often requires choosing which damage you're willing to accept rather than avoiding damage altogether. What makes them uniquely oppressive is how little it protects the player. There are no safety nets, no guaranteed paths, and no reliable way to recover once momentum slips. Hunger, sanity, disease, and environmental hazards constantly drain your ability to continue. You're forced to treat every encounter as a cost-benefit decision, not as a challenge to overcome. Even victory can feel like a loss if it drains too many limited resources. Narratively, the games lean heavily into existential horror, ritual, and cosmic dread. Information is fragmented, motives are unclear, and knowledge often introduces more danger rather than clarity. Progression feels less like growth and more like adaptation, learning which risks are survivable and which ones aren't. The sequel expands these systems while maintaining the same oppressive philosophy, adding more layered world states and long-term consequence loops. Reception reflects its extremity. It was praised for its originality, thematic cohesion, and willingness to push discomfort as design, while many players find it too punishing, obscure, and emotionally draining. Fear and hunger doesn't aim to be fair. It aims to be consistent. And that consistency creates a uniquely suffocating experience. Tainted Grail, Fall of Avalon presents itself as an open-world dark fantasy RPG, but its structure is far more restrictive and survival-oriented than its scale suggests. The world is wide, yet hostile, and movement through it is constantly filtered through limited resources, dangerous regions, and systems that punish careless exploration. Combat is deliberate and weighty, emphasizing stamina management, spacing, and preparation over raw aggression. The defining feature of its world is decay. Regions are governed by supernatural corruption that actively reshapes what areas are safe to traverse and when. Exploration becomes a logistical problem rather than a curiosity exercise. You're not simply roaming. You're planning routes, managing supplies, and deciding how much danger you're willing to accept for information or progress. Progression reflects that same tone. Character growth is slow, equipment upgrades are situational rather than transformative, and survival systems remain relevant even late into the campaign. You never outgrow the world's hostility. You only learn to navigate it more efficiently. Reception has been cautiously positive. Critics praised its ambition, atmosphere, and world design while noting rough edges, technical instability, and uneven pacing. Tainted Grail doesn't aim for comfort. It aims for immersion through discomfort. And for players who value tension over freedom, that philosophy is exactly what makes it compelling. Lunacid draws from early first-person dungeon RPGs, but its structure is far less nostalgic than it first appears. It operates on slow discovery, fragile survival, and persistent uncertainty rather than power growth. Combat is simple on the surface, yet deliberately restrained. Healing resources are limited, enemy patterns punish recklessness, and movement through its maze-like spaces is meant to make you feel cautious rather than confident. The game teaches you early that information is often more valuable than equipment. Exploration is its core tension engine. Areas are dim, fragmented, and filled with subtle environmental storytelling. There is rarely a clear, correct path, and backtracking is often required not because the game is padding content, but because it expects you to reinterpret spaces once you've learned more about their dangers. The world doesn't reveal itself willingly. It rewards patience. Progression reinforces that mood. Levels improve your survivability, but never to the point of dominance. You become more capable, but the environments grow more abstract, more hostile, and less predictable. Advancement feels like adaptation rather than empowerment, and knowledge of safe routes and enemy behaviors becomes your most valuable asset. Its reception mirrors that slow burn design. The atmosphere, environmental storytelling, and unsettling restraint deserve praise, while some players found its pacing inconsistent and its systems underexplained. Lunacid isn't built around conquest. It's built around navigation, of space, of threat, and of uncertainty.